There's something rather uncomfortable that happens to certain people. They satisfy a desire. They reach for something they've been craving, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. And then, in the moment after, in that peculiar silence that follows pleasure, they feel it. Not guilt, not shame, something stranger than that. An emptiness that wasn't supposed to be there. And we've been told this is a moral failing, haven't we? This lingering dissatisfaction. We've been taught that if we just controlled ourselves better, disciplined ourselves harder, became more evolved, the wanting would stop. But I want to suggest something quite different to you today. That the wanting itself, this thing we call lust, isn't the problem at all. It's a messenger. And we've been punishing the messenger for centuries while ignoring the message it carries. Now, I'm not speaking of desire in the ordinary sense. I'm not talking about simple appetite or physical need. I'm speaking of something far more subtle and far more revealing. The kind of wanting that returns even after it's been satisfied. The kind of craving that intensifies precisely when you try to extinguish it. Have you ever noticed this? You fulfill the desire, and for a moment, perhaps a few minutes, perhaps a few hours, there's peace. But then it comes back, sometimes stronger than before. And you think, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be free of this? But here's what nobody tells you. The desire isn't trying to torment you. It's trying to show you something. Something about the one who desires. Something about the architecture of the self that's doing all this wanting. Let me explain what I mean. When you were very young, before language had fully taken hold, you didn't experience yourself as separate from the world around you. There was no clear boundary between you and not you. The warmth of your mother's skin, the sound of rain on the window, the sensation of hunger in your belly, these weren't happening to you. They simply were, and you were them. But then something began to happen. People gave you a name. They pointed at your reflection and said, "That's you." They praised you for certain behaviors and frowned at others. They drew a line, invisible but absolute, between what was inside your skin and what was outside. And slowly, gradually, a stranger was born. The one you now call I. This is what we mean by ego, you see. Not arrogance, not vanity, something far more fundamental than that. The basic sensation of being a separate self, encased in flesh, looking out at a world that is fundamentally other. A passenger trapped inside a vehicle it doesn't fully understand. And here's where the difficulty begins. Because this passenger, this constructed self, feels incomplete. It has to. The very act of separation creates a kind of wound, a fissure that runs through the center of your experience. You feel it as a subtle wrongness, a background hum of insufficiency. The sense that something is missing, though you can never quite name what it is. Now, this wound doesn't stay empty for long. Life fills it with sediment. Think of all the small moments of disconnection you've experienced. The times you reached for warmth and found coldness. The times you opened yourself and met a closed door. A parent's distracted gaze when you needed their full attention. A friend's subtle withdrawal when you showed too much of yourself. A lover's silence in the moment you most needed words. None of these were catastrophic, were they? None of them would qualify as trauma in the clinical sense. But they accumulated, layer upon layer, like silt settling at the bottom of a river, changing its course so gradually you never noticed. And each layer whispered the same thing. You are alone. Connection must be earned. Love is conditional. The wound of separation became a wound of rejection. And the ego, clever creature that it is, learned to protect itself. It built walls. It developed strategies. It created elaborate systems for avoiding the vulnerability that had caused so much pain. But here's what the ego doesn't understand. You cannot wall off a wound without walling off the healing. You cannot protect yourself from pain without also protecting yourself from the very connection you're desperate to feel. And so the wound remains, hidden beneath the surface, covered in layers of distraction and achievement and busyness, but always there, always aching, always looking for relief. And this is where lust enters the picture, not as a villain, not as a weakness, but as a desperate attempt at healing. You see, there's something peculiar about intense desire. about that electricity that runs through you when you want something badly enough. In those moments of peak wanting, something remarkable happens. The thinking stops, the constant mental commentary, the endless analysis, the voice that narrates your life and judges your every move. It goes quiet. For just a moment, you are not a separate self evaluating an experience. You are the experience itself. And this is what the ego has been searching for all along. Not the object of desire, not the body or the substance or the achievement. The silence, the temporary death of the one who feels separate. Think about it. What do people describe when they talk about moments of intense pleasure? They say, I lost myself. They say, I forgot everything. They say, for a moment, I wasn't thinking at all. This is not coincidence. Lust promises what the ego most fears and most craves: the dissolution of boundaries, the end of separation, the return to that original state before the wound was made. But here's the tragedy. It's a simulation. A beautiful, convincing, utterly temporary simulation. Because the moment the intensity fades, the moment the chemicals settle and the mind returns to its normal frequency, the ego floods back in, and it brings the wound with it, often feeling even more raw than before. The river has returned to its familiar course. I once spoke with a man who had struggled with this cycle for decades. He was intelligent, accomplished. By any external measure, he had everything, and yet he found himself returning again and again to behaviors he knew were ultimately hollow, patterns of pursuit and satisfaction and emptiness that repeated with mechanical precision. And he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, it's not the pleasure I'm addicted to, it's the 3 seconds before it, the moment when I'm not me anymore. He understood something most people never articulate. The object of desire is never really the object. It's what the wanting promises about the one who wants. A moment of reprieve from the burden of being separate, a brief vacation from the exhausting work of being a self. Now, when people begin to recognize this pattern, when they see how desire is being used as a painkiller for a wound it cannot heal, they typically do something quite predictable. They declare war on the desire itself. They try to suppress it, control it, master it through willpower. They treat their wanting as an enemy to be conquered. And I want to suggest to you that this is perhaps the greatest trap of all. Because who is fighting the desire? The ego. Who wants to be free of wanting? The same I that was doing the wanting in the first place. Do you see the problem? The one trying to escape the prison is made of the same material as the prison walls. You cannot ego your way out of an ego problem. I've watched people spend years in this battle, decades even, oscillating between indulgence and suppression, binging and restricting, the pendulum swinging back and forth, and each swing convincing them that the other extreme is the solution. But the pendulum is the problem, not its position. So what then? If satisfaction doesn't work and suppression doesn't work, what remains? Something quite radical. Something that feels, at first, like doing nothing at all. You simply watch, not watch in order to stop, not watch in order to change, not watch with an agenda of any kind. Just watch. When the desire arises, you notice it, like noticing a cloud passing across the sky. You observe its texture, its urgency, the stories it tells about what will happen if it's not fulfilled. But you don't climb inside the cloud. You don't become the storm. You remain as the sky that holds it. And here's what begins to happen when you do this. The desire, which had seemed so solid, so absolutely real and demanding, starts to reveal its nature. It's not a thing. It's a process, a movement of energy looking for a place to land. And beneath it, if you look carefully, you'll find something else entirely. Not lust, not craving, loneliness, grief, the ancient ache of separation itself. The desire was never about the object. It was a layer of noise covering a deeper signal. And the signal has been trying to get your attention for as long as you can remember. I want you to consider something that might seem strange at first. What if you are not incomplete? What if the sense of lack, the chronic insufficiency that drives all this seeking, what if it's not actually accurate? What if it's a story you've been told so many times you forgot it was a story? There's an old metaphor I find useful here. Imagine walking at night and suddenly freezing in fear because you've seen a snake coiled on the path ahead. Your heart races. Your body prepares to flee or fight. The fear is absolutely real. But then someone brings a light, and you see that it was never a snake at all. It was a rope, coiled in a way that, in the darkness, resembled something dangerous. The fear was real, but what it was based on was not. Now, the ego is rather like walking through life mistaking the rope for a snake. You feel the fear of separation, the urgency of incompleteness, and these feelings are real. But the thing they're based on, the idea that you are fundamentally a fragment, a piece cut off from the whole, this was always an illusion. You were never separated from life. You are life. The wave was never separate from the ocean. The separation existed only in the story, in the labels, in the constant mental activity that drew boundaries where none actually exist. And when this is seen, not as a concept but as a living recognition, something extraordinary happens to desire. It doesn't disappear, but it transforms. The desperate quality drains away. The urgency evaporates. What remains is something much simpler, a natural movement toward life, toward connection, toward experience. But without the grasping, without the sense that your survival depends on fulfillment, you can still appreciate beauty. You can still feel attraction. You can still want things, but you're no longer wanting from a place of poverty. You're wanting from a place of fullness. This is the difference, you see, between desire that arises from lack and desire that arises from overflow. One is trying to fill a hole. The other is simply celebrating what's already present. I spoke earlier of that peculiar emptiness that follows satisfaction. That strange, hollow feeling when you've gotten what you wanted and it still isn't enough. Here is what I want you to understand about that emptiness. It's not a sign of your brokenness. It's not evidence of your spiritual failure. It's your deepest intelligence trying to tell you something, trying to redirect your attention away from objects and toward the one who perceives them. The emptiness is not the problem. The emptiness is the door. Because when you finally stop trying to fill it, when you let it be exactly as it is without rushing to cover it with the next desire, something shifts. You discover that the emptiness isn't empty at all. It's spacious. It's alive. It's the same space that holds your thoughts and your breath and the sound of wind through leaves. It's the consciousness that was here before your first memory and will be here when the last thought fades. You were never incomplete. You were infinite, pretending to be small. So here we are at the heart of it. The danger of lust is not the pleasure it offers. The pleasure is just physiology. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. The danger is believing that the pleasure can heal something it cannot touch. The wound of separation cannot be healed by addition. You cannot add enough experiences, enough sensations, enough fulfillments to make a self feel whole. You can only recognize that wholeness was never absent, that the seeking itself was the problem, that the one who was looking for completion was already complete and simply couldn't see it. And perhaps most importantly, the ones who suffer most from desire are not the ones who feel it most intensely. They are the ones who have made it mean something about themselves, who have turned a natural movement of energy into evidence of their corruption or failure, who have added shame to sensation and called it spirituality. The truly free person isn't the one who no longer desires. It's the one who can feel desire arise, watch it move through them, and let it pass without building a story around it, without making it a referendum on their worth, without using it as proof that they are too broken to ever arrive home. You have never not been home. That's the secret nobody tells you. The journey you thought you were on, the endless seeking, the searching for something to complete you, it was a journey from here to here, a circular path that leads back to where you always were. You don't need to earn your way to wholeness. You don't need to purify yourself into peace. You don't need to conquer desire to be worthy of love. You need only to see clearly what you have always been, not the wound, not the wanting, not the endless cycle of lack and seeking, but the awareness in which all of this appears, the ocean that was never threatened by its waves, the stillness that remains when the grasping finally stops. This is what lust was pointing toward all along. Not the object of desire, not the pleasure of fulfillment, but the possibility of resting, finally, in the only place that was ever truly home, in yourself. Not the constructed self, not the story of who you are, but the vast, silent, undamaged presence that watches all stories arise and dissolve. That has been watching since the beginning. That will be watching long after the wanting fades. And that, my friends, that is the truth that lust cannot touch but always secretly seeks. The fullness that was never lost, only forgotten, only waiting to be remembered.